That's what that is. But welcome to another PAFA Pours, everyone. Tonight is Creativity Collectives and PAFA. I'm Abby King, the Assistant Director of Adult Programs here at PAFA. And to start, I wanted to respectfully acknowledge that I, along with our institution and many of our attendees, are speaking to you from the ancestral lands of the Lenape people, whose presence and resilience in Pennsylvania continues to this day. We take this opportunity to honor the original caretakers of the land and recognize the histories that have brought our institution and ourselves here. And before I hand things over to our wonderful speakers, I want to just mention a few things. We are recording tonight's event, and I'll be posting it later on PAFA's YouTube channel. If you know of anyone, students, colleagues, people that couldn't be here, Wi-Fi goes out, just know that it will be archived on there with our library of programs. We have 3 speakers, so it's a jam-packed program, but we promise to have a little bit of time at the end for questions or thoughts. Please feel to drop them in the chat as we go. Just know we'll address them there at the end. And I want to put in a plug for some amazing things we have coming up this fall. So we have things ranging from small in-person events, like this Saturday, we have a curator-led tour of the exhibition Linger and Flow. We have an all-new Art at Noon lineup that's going to be only online, that you can catch that mainly on Wednesday afternoons. And then we have exhibitions that you can come and see in person. So I'm always trying to encourage people to come see the art if you can. Tonight's talk was actually loosely inspired by an exhibition we have on view. I know some folks are going to talk about in a second, but Women in Motion, 150 Years of Women's Artistic Networks at PAFA. So I'll share links to all that soon, since I know I'm speeding through here, but please, we love seeing you in whatever capacity feels good right now. So I'm now happy and proud to hand things over to our speakers this evening. Once again, I'm introducing Clarity Haynes. It's so good to have you with us once again, along with Elena Peteva. Excuse me, I tried my best, Elena, I'm sorry. And then Suzanne Schireson. So welcome you all. Thank you for being here, and we'll get started.
Thank you. Thank you, Abby. And thank you everyone for being here. Well, great. Thanks, Clarity. Wonderful. I'd like to start with saying that as artists, we engage in dialogues with each other in our studios, in the exhibitions that we come together in panel discussions such as this one. We engage with each other in dialogues with the artists that came before us, being one-directional dialogues, and with our contemporary peers, multi-directional dialogues, again, in the shows that we put together, the catalogs that we put together, in the private studio conversations that we have, in the school studios that we share as students and then as professional artists. And what is most amazing about this exchange is that we all learn from each other, and we influence each other, and we help each other and support each other and exchange invaluable things that fuel our own studio work and those around us. And we never know when a chance encounter may become something much bigger and much more significant and much longer than just meeting a person over a studio visit or in a classroom or at an artist talk or a panel discussion. So having said that, this is just what happened to us, Clarity, Susie, and I, many years ago in 1999. We met as freshmen at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, and we were in all our classes together from the very beginning. We saw each other grow, learn, fail, exhibit, compete for awards at the annual student exhibition at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, and exchange ideas, visit each other's studios. And since then, we have continued to stay in touch, and we have continued these invaluable artistic dialogues that have sustained our practice as friends and as peers and as contemporary artists. When we were about to graduate, we really wanted to find a way for us to stay in touch, to maintain the rigor of our studio practice, and to exhibit together with the understanding that whatever we do for our careers, it was up for us to get it done as women artists. There weren't going to be probably many favors or people picking it up, maybe if we were lucky, but whatever we knew that whatever we do is going to get this done for us, what we are going to be able to achieve as women artists in the contemporary art world. So we created Corpus VI, the Women's Figurative Artists Collective, Corpus VI, and we had our first exhibition together as the Corpus VI Collective at Highwire Gallery in Philadelphia, in downtown Philadelphia in 2005. I consider this one of the biggest early achievements of mine, and I feel that Susie and Clarity probably feel the same way, as something that we created together by ourselves, and it was our first, I should say, I hope I can speak for both of you, but our first exhibition that really felt like the first professional step that launched our careers forward. I'd like to invite my friends and colleagues to contribute because this was the starting point and a lot more followed after. So Susie, Clarity.
True. Yeah, it's absolutely true. I think also when we started talking about that exhibit, it was the first time that we had really planned out a show in advance, or I had planned out a show that far in advance. So I had no idea in the moment what I was going to be exhibiting. I don't think the work I have on the postcard for this show was even ended up being in the show. And I think it was very exciting. I remember seeing your work, Elena, that I hadn't seen it since school, since the ASE at that point. And so even to see in that short time how much our work had changed was very exciting from the work that we've been doing at PAFA. And having the work together in dialogue in that way within this very open space of the Highwire Gallery, which I think was like a single floor or part of a floor in the building. What was the building's name? It was next door to PAFA's studios.
Well, the Gilbert Building.
Gilbert Building, the Gilbert Building, absolutely. And I think seeing it in that open space, which was so different than the museum where the ASC had been held, in the Museum of the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, which is that incredible Frank Furness architecture. But to see it in that white-walled, really simplified space, it was very exciting, and it felt very much like a new turn. So then a lot happened in 10 years, but 10 years later, we had another exhibit at the New Bedford Art Museum. And so this came about. We had been in contact with each other on and off, but after PAFA, we went our separate ways. We went off to graduate school and traveled, and we kept touching back in. And so we'll continue to talk about that through this talk, just how we kind of maintained our friendship and our professional relationship. But it wasn't until 2015 that actually, we had the wheels in motion, applying for another large show. And so again, this museum schedule is about 2 years out. So we had began planning the show a bit earlier. And by this point, Elena and I had both been hired at UMass Dartmouth which has a campus in downtown New Bedford. And so we were both teaching painting and drawing, and we applied to a number of venues, but we felt the New Bedford Art Museum would have this great connection with our university as well. And New Bedford, for those of you who haven't been, has this incredible community of artists and art collectives. And there's always a lot happening in terms of engaging the public with artwork within New Bedford. So it felt like an exciting place to have that show, not back in Philadelphia again, but to kind of be following us a little bit too, to access a new community. And so in accessing that new community, we also invited 3 new members to join us. And so Holly Schrossel-Brigham, thank you, Stacy Latz-Savage, and Laurie Kaplowitz were the 3 additional artists who we invited. And so if you go to that next slide, Clarity, this image, this is Stacy's sculpture, which is, it was very interesting to see the work in dialogue with each other again in this other space. Now, this space is actually a former bank. And so there are a lot of different rooms within the museum that you'll see in some of these images. And so we were able to kind of pair work, have these intimate settings with 1 or 2 or 3 of us sometimes, but you didn't really see the work all together in that big open space the same way as Highwire, which made for a different read of the space. And I think felt like a lot of smaller conversations, as you moved through. And this is my painting with Clarity's drawings on the wall. And the last slide was Elena's work within the gallery too. There was a vault in this museum where we had video work because it was a former bank. So literally the old vault, there's this big circular door and that's opened. And there's a space within there for video work as well. And then there was an additional space where Elena had a projection, so it was nice because this space had so many options so that we could have video as well as sculpture and painting. Laurie Kaplowitz's work is on the wall there as well. And Laurie had a very large stacked grid of work. So there were a lot of options in terms of the installation. And I think that was such a fun part, actually, was having all these options and installing together and not seeing each other. We'd kept in touch, we'd emailed so much. And I know that a few of us had studio visits, but to actually be there in the flesh and see their work again, to really to hold it and help them with it. I think you both helped me stretch this painting. I brought it unstretched to the museum because it was too large. And it was so much fun to put this together. Jamie Aretsky was the exhibition coordinator at that time. And Jamie's in this photo and was such a huge help, just helping us problem solve from tech to, big carpentry issues. And I think that was very important for us to be involved. We've always been involved physically in the installation with these exhibitions and writing a lot of the material and just having a strong hand in terms of the curation as well. And so here we are with, everything kind of laid out there. But I think that, there were so many interpretations of the body throughout the museum. That was very interesting to be able to take in, since all 6 of the artists continue to work with the figure. And that's so nice. This gives you a great sense of scale of Clarity's work as well. It was amazing to see that. I mean, that scale shift shocked me, Clarity. Because I'd seen the paintings so much in reproduction, but it was completely different to be there. And so, yes, I'd love to. And here is our group. We're missing Holly in this particular photo. We tried to get everybody in there. And Memory Holloway as well, who is a professor emeritus from UMass Dartmouth, who helped us with the curation. And I should add that Stacy and Laurie, who are pictured here, are also faculty. Laurie is professor emeritus at this point, but faculty from UMass Dartmouth as well. So it was wonderful to invite that community and have, PAFA with this UMass Dartmouth community interacting as well. And it was just a short walk to the studios for our students. So it was a very easy way to create access for them. And Clarity was a visiting artist that semester as well. So there were so many nice touch points, you know, within that. So I'd love to open it up if you guys have anything to add here to the NBAM show.
I just was thinking about how you said we were physically involved. I feel like we were taught very well by our education at PAFA how to put on a show.
Mm-hmm.
Hammer out and I had to build a shelf, I remember, for my show at PAFA in my second year at the ASE. And it's like, it dawned on me, like, I have to learn how to build a shelf. It was fun to kind of like get into the nitty gritty with you guys again, 10 years later, after we had all kind of, our lives had taken us in different directions. And it's great to see too, your little baby August, who I'm sure looks very different now, but yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I'd like to add that even though our paths diverged and we went in our different directions in this 10-year period between the two exhibitions, we always stayed in touch in different ways. I remember having this wonderful studio visit with Clarity in her Brooklyn studio, and I loved seeing the development of her work. And again, this is us as peers at the Academy as students, but then we continued to be peers in a very valuable way where we stayed in touch and saw our work evolve and offer each other feedback, just the way we did back when we were the Academy students, having late nights in the studio, you know, trying to complete that painting or the drawing for a particular deadline. So having this kind of network and this connection and having this artist collective that has helped us stay together has been really important to us to strengthen our friendship, but also our relationship as professional artists, and truly help each other, whether it's in a studio feedback or sharing information or putting together an exhibition as a group. So it's something that we went to different graduate programs, so we went to different parts of the country, but we always kept in touch. Sometimes maybe it was every 6 months. At the worst, maybe once a year, but usually it was more than that. And Susie, and you know, I remember the friends from the Academy and like everybody coming to our wedding in Princeton, and it's all kinds of different connections and crossing our paths again and again and again, and staying in touch with each other. I just can't underscore how important this has been to us personally, but also professionally.
Well, I think I would love to move it forward so we're each going to talk about our work a little bit and then get a little bit more deeply into the whole idea of artist collectives and what we were kind of thinking about. I have a couple of slides to show. I started exploring the torso as a subject matter for portraiture while I was a student at PAFA, and it was a very supportive environment with which to develop my ideas. And at the time, my torso portraits were life-sized, and they were from life, and a lot of them were like models that I got to know and hired after having worked with them in a figure drawing class or a painting class at PAFA. And then I started in 2010 working on a larger scale. So this is one of my first large scale breast portraits. I call them breast portraits, the breast portrait project. And I just title it with the name of the sitter, and the name of the sitter is Gwen, who was a survivor of carcinoid cancer. And this is a 2015 painting, Jace, which is also about 58 inches tall, so a larger than life body. And I got really into detail around that time. And you know, I was just thinking about our PAFA education and how, you know, little snippets that you get from the teachers. Like I remember Renee Folks telling me, if you want to do detail, you just have to narrow down your vision and say, today I'm going to work on the shoulder. And so more than 10 years later, that's advice that I was still taking. And this is a 2019 painting called Genesis of the late Genesis Breyer Peorage, a body-centric artist and musician who passed away just a couple of years ago. And this is also the same size. And I really was interested in how the body tells the story of the person, and both through the tattoos and also through body modification and the necklace, which for Genesis, each little charm had a special significance. And also Genesis, her work was her body. Like she had a project with her, I guess, wife, Lady J, and they got all these surgeries to try to look more like each other. So, you know, it was really interesting to tell the story of a body that already had a public story, and that story was actually an artwork. So it was a real honor to get to work with Jen. And that's about it from me. And I can't wait to see what Elena had to say about her work.
Thanks, Clarity. I've always been interested in the human figure, in visual narrative, and constructing metaphors for the viewer to respond to, engage with, and interpret. I've always been interested in representation and in invention, and it has taken me quite a while to put together in one these two loves and these two big interests of mine, but I think it's finally happening. I hope. I went to the academy for my undergraduate degree, and then I went to Syracuse University for master's in painting, and I continued to go after these two loves and trying to figure out how to make them work together and come in one cohesive whole. When I think about my work, at the core of my work is I think with this allegorical representation of our individual or our social states. And what I try to do is, again, I love representation, but to me, I see representation as a vehicle for me to construct these layered metaphors, which I hope to draw the viewer with so that they can engage with them and decode, slow down and decode and interpret. I work with drawing. I also work with painting. These are charcoal drawings. They're life-size. The hands, and sometimes I use work with the whole body or the head. I try to create images that are both subtle and charged, so they act as potent signifiers for layered meanings. I don't want to be literal with my images. I'm always wary of that because the storyteller in me is always wary of the literal story. So subtlety is very, very important to me. And I use the titles also to point the viewer in the right direction, but not spell out what a particular piece is about. Like this one is called To Mend Oneself. The previous one was called Turmoil and Silence. The construction of the images is very important to me in terms of the formal elements of the micro and the macro. I think of the human body as a landscape, a terrain through which we can travel on. And when we zoom in on something, it really becomes essentially an organic abstraction when we zoom in on the human form. So I'm as interested in the actual representation of the human form as these micro abstractions that they embedded in our skin. I guess with the next image, the last thing that I would like to say is to differentiate between the two narratives that are equally important to me, but I think they're essential to coexist and support each other for the success of the piece itself. I'm very interested in the iconographic narrative, which leads the viewer's conscious interpretation of the image as what we understand it to be. But I'm also equally interested in the formal narrative, which affects the viewer, I believe, in a much deeper level, on an emotional level, where the formal decisions that we make as artists are really highly evocative and trigger certain emotions and responses in the viewer, which the image of a box or a chair in our conscious understanding of what it is would fall short if they were not realized through these formal decisions that really hit us or get us in the gut, that gut reaction that a viewer has, even though we don't necessarily understand why. So with this note, and this is of Smoke and Ash, and I'd like to pass it on to Susie.
Hi, yes, I go by Susie. You're more than welcome to call me that too. I'm including some recent work that I've made since the pandemic. And these paintings, this particular one is actually called Stacy the Welder and was inspired by Stacy Lat Savage, who we included in that last show at MBAM. And these are on paper and are an oil primed paper. So they're oil paintings. And I think I like how both Clarity and Elena have talked about these veins that have run through their work since their time at PAFA. So it's interesting to frame it like that. And I think for me, I've always been very interested in images of women working. That's always been a constant. And also have just tried so hard to get painting and drawing to not feel like two different things, which as a student, I just fought and fought. And so by working on paper, I found it incredibly freeing to move in and out of these with charcoal and also with paint. So they feel kind of a hybrid, but they still have the body of an oil painting. And in particular, each of these images are based on a mother or caretaker. And I imagine her a studio, I paint her a studio. And these are inspired by actually conversations, on the playground, like with other moms, half the time, but also through the pandemic with a lot of conversations that I was having. And the buildings become increasingly more fictional. The architecture starts to kind of break away and become more atmospheric. And I think a lot of times it's like the women are getting to work before the building's even built. And it unlocks this kind of edge between the architecture and the sky that has become really exciting to continue to push. This particular one, actually, I started working this way because when my daughter, my second child, was born, I was working more at home, trying to find a way to make that happen, and it coincided with the pandemic. And so this particular one, I had inserted her, but normally I'm dealing with an adult body. But it's interesting to actually paint a child, because the scale shift then allows you to do so much more in terms of like intervals of space, and it opens up the image in an unusual way. And so I'm very interested in these transparent washes of color, and also working with fluorescent color. So this is really in person like a neon orange, and for this sense of often that they're kind of these nocturnal women, that it's happening at a time of day where twilight is illuminating the sky and also kind of illuminating the work, and that color is sort of a symbol of that energy expanding. And I think that they're not about escape, like they're not about the fantasy of running away to your own little shack in the woods, but more about understanding like a time to reflect and refuel, and like carving out that space for yourself, finding that space. I had gone to Indiana University after the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. So that took me to the middle of the country. And then it was nice because Elena ended up teaching in Illinois. And so we were able to connect out there as well. And most of, no, you can go to the next one. That's great. The Elizabeth Shippen Green. So I've been looking, I love looking at women's studios. And so this summer I was reading the Red Rose Girls, this wonderful book by Alice Carter. And so this image is from that. It's Elizabeth Shippen Green in her studio in Cogsley. And so I just thought it was interesting to show that, since it was a source that had inspired me. But we wanted to talk also about, you could go to the next image, I think. And there were these wonderful essays that were written for our catalog at the New Bedford Museum show. And Anna Dempsey, Memory Holloway, and Pamela Karimi, all professors at UMass Dartmouth, each wrote an essay for this catalog. And Anna's essay in particular talked about women's collectives from Philadelphia, and kind of brought us full circle with that, which was something that we had acknowledged in some of our exhibition proposals as well. So that last image of Elizabeth Shippen Green, that she was part of the Red Rose Girls, but Anna particularly talks about the Philadelphia Plastic Club. And the essay was The Philadelphia Plastic Club Reimagined in Contemporary New England. So I was just going to read a small excerpt from Anna's essay. Anna says, in the tradition of early female collaborations, such as the Plastic Club, these artists have chosen to form a collective based on common artistic interests, working with, interpreting, representing, and reconsidering one of the most ancient, complex, and challenging subjects in art, the human figure. They employ different ideas, practices, and materials to create representational bodies that engage in conversation with each other and with a broad community of viewers. The Corpus VI artists have created, to borrow Marcia Miskimen and Dorothy Rowe's words, 2013, an embodied, embedded, generous, and effective form of subjectivity that reclaims the representational aesthetic dismissed by modernist critics. I should say that Anna was quoting us in that line about the challenging subject in art being the human figure. But it was wonderful to look back on this week, Anna, and I was feeling so grateful for your writing. So we could keep going. So here are the Red Rose Girls. This is a reference photo taken 1523 Chestnut Street. And we were reminiscing, the three of us, yesterday as we were organizing this talk, about different points where we had modeled for each other. And so I thought it was great here that this was this reference photo that they were taking, that the Carter book had said was specifically for a cover painted by Violet Oakley. But I feel like there's such a similarity there with this Elizabeth Shippen Green college calendar as well. And so we just wanted to kind of make that connection between Jessie Wilcox Smith, Elizabeth Shippen Green, and Violet Oakley, the Red Rose Girls, because it was definitely a group that we were aware of at PAFA. But unlike the Red Rose Girls, we've lived across the country. We don't have the kind of bond that they have, but we also we don't have the same kind of commitment. We don't need to have the same kind of commitment. I think part of what's allowed this collective to last so long is that we come and we go and we live our lives, and we bring so many different influences and new ideas back to each other every time we reconnect. And it doesn't feel particularly planned. Like, we don't have a certain date where we're going to be having a group chat or something like that. But it's amazing to me how much we've just naturally overlapped and circled back. And I think that's been really inspiring and encouraging. And I know it's going to keep going. Oh, and I loved seeing this in the Women in Motion show that's at PAFA right now, this painting June by Violet Oakley. And I was amazed when you see this in person down in the skirt, it's all of her graphite lines. It's just the pure drawing you can see coming out of that painting. And anyway, just a beautiful piece. But just to bring that back, that the Red Rose Girls, have very prominent role in this Women in Motion show at PAFA, and that they all studied there as well, which is where they met.
And that first image in the very beginning of, it would be hard to get back to without doing a really quick flip, but that's actually from the Women in Motion show, and it shows, it's a map of women's networks and a historical map of those networks that are affiliated with PAFA. Oh, it's a great time to.
Thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah. It's kind of fun to see our work together again, because that first show we had together, we had the postcard with all of our work next to each other. And thank you for putting this together, Elena. It's kind of interesting how we've kind of worked within these themes with commonalities and differences, and our work kind of still has a dialogue.
Absolutely. I'm already looking forward to our exhibition in 2025.
Yes.
Seems like it'd be every decade.
Exactly.
It's around the corner. It's, already almost 2022. So
yeah, we actually better get working on that.
Yeah, getting the proposals in.
Mm-hmm. So that's our last slide. We could, I'm sure we all have a little more to share in terms of reminiscing and things, but we could also open it up.
Yeah. I wanted to say a huge thank you already, of course, to Susie, Clarity, and Elena for sharing that, what a wonderful friendship and your amazing work. I do want to encourage folks to put things in the chat. Love to hear from you. We've already got a few people, some PAFA folks, including Ann Stassen, our former Dean of Students, saying that it's fabulous to see the three of you again. Always nice to see you here. And then we have one that just came in, and there's other ones I'll circle back to, but from Anna Crane asking, how do you create proposals for future projects? So maybe looking to 2025 or looking to the past.
Great question.
Yeah, that's a really good question.
I think because there are three of us and we're in three different locations, or were at three different locations, this was a big plus because Clarity here in New York City and we're based in Providence. The bigger the network becomes, the more options there are. So the New Bedford Art Museum is in New Bedford, which is right next to the College of Visual and Performing Arts at UMass Dartmouth. So this was a very natural fit for us to work with an institution nearby that was the right fit for what we needed. 6 artists that could present together, but also have individual spaces for depending on the project's needs. I think we definitely want, looking forward, we would want to engage with different locations and different institutions. So
yeah, and from, we just it was kind of like there was a cover letter and there was a statement of intention, and there was a description of kind of what we were envisioning for the show. And I think we would send these back and forth to each other to get edits from each other before sending them. But yeah, I think even probably for that first show, we probably had to do something semi-formal.
I think so. And I think our documentation is going to be so important for, future applications too. So making sure that things are really, that those installations are documented. But I think thinking about work that having each artist, if you wanted to create a group proposal, have a small sample portfolio and maybe just choosing 1 or 2 images from each person. I think you don't want to, depends on what the proposal is requiring, but I think to just send a feeler to an institution to see if it's something that they might be interested in. If they have a formal proposal process, they might have a specific number. I remember the question for the New Bedford Museum was why here? Like, why do you want to have this at the New Bedford Museum of Art? And I looked at our proposal today, actually, because it was like in my desktop, and we talked about the collaborative aspects of the arts community in New Bedford, and that we felt like this aligned with some of those values. So I think that's a key one. It's like, you don't want to just apply to like a random place, but how is this going to interact with that community? Like, what is that connection going to be?
And I feel that having the catalog from this most recent exhibition is going to be very important for future shows, because again, documenting the exhibition was very important, but also having a catalog with the essays are going to definitely help toward the future exhibitions. So for anyone who is putting together proposals, take good pictures, really good photos of your work and the work installed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see Anna says site-specific projects versus social commentary. I think that kind of like I think it helped to have a little bit of a historical context with our proposal too, thinking about framing like the framework of this women's collective coming out of Philadelphia, that just having some kind of connection to other work that has that might have some meaning or connection for the curator who's looking at your proposal, or the institution that's looking at the proposal.
There are a couple of questions that I feel like I can combine in one answer. Did you always set out to be a women's collective, or did that just happen organically? We actually, when we created Corpus VI in 2005, actually we talked about it before then, in 2003, but the exhibition was 2005. Yes, it was our intent for this to be a collective of women artists that work with the figure. This was important to us because there's so many men artists out there in the museums, in the galleries, and we wanted to be strong together as female artists that have something in common in the academy, being students together at the academy and growing as students at the academy, but also our common interest in working specifically with the figure in contemporary art. So this is where the name came from, Corpus VI, because we were looking for another word for body, and corpus sat right with us. And there were 6 of us. So Corpus VI, it came.
Yeah, thank you for that. I didn't know that too. That's great to know about the name and the lineage behind it and the intention. So I wanted to jump in because we do have someone who has a question that I'm going to call in a second. Our curator of the Women in Motion exhibition that we've been referencing tonight with Cogsley and things. So Anna Marley, I'm going to ask to unmute you.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to meet you, Elena and Suzanne. Good to see you again, Clarity. I've had a long day, so I'm not looking very glamorous, and my cat's crawling all over me. But I love your references to the Red Rose Girls, and your what you just talked about, Elena, kind of feeds into this question. But one of the quotes that we open up Women in Motion with is Cecilia Beau at the turn of the 20th century saying, I hope the time is near that the term women in art will be as strange sounding as the term men in art is now. And, I open the show with that because I think, unfortunately, it is very clear that we still do need the term women in art. And I'm wondering, what your experiences has been as practicing women in the art world, and also, at least some of you, as queer women working in the art world, looking back to the legacy of the Red Rose Girls, and they were not able to be as open as artists today, but what things do you think have changed, have gotten better, and how do you think this idea of women's networks has helped you succeed in a similar way that women 100 years ago succeeded?
That's such a great question. Wow. I guess I feel that probably if we were making our description now, we would probably say women and non-binary people. I think that really the main point of it is that identities other than cisgender men often have a harder time. And I think we were really aware too, as we graduated, and that's such an uncertain time when you leave the kind of protective cloak of the institution, how much support were we actually going to get out there? There are statistics that are readily available about, the huge number of art students that are women, and then the small number of artists that are actually women that are at the higher levels of the art market, or exhibiting at major institutions. So I think that we definitely had that awareness, and since then I do think things have definitely gotten better, and especially at PAFA. I think PAFA has evolved a lot in the past almost 20 years. So that's really wonderful, just looking at the exhibitions and the consciousness around how PAFA's history can be looked at critically, and thinking about contemporary art and contemporary issues in programming. So yeah, I do think that it's kind of important though when saying women artists to also clarify, in a more with finer language. But yeah. Do you guys have any thoughts on the question?
I mean, I shudder to think what it would be like to be an artist with kids 100 years ago, or even 20 years ago, that struggle. And not that it's particularly easy now, but I'm amazed at these networks that I've found of artist mothers, and just the dialogue around that, and that I'm seeing that much more within contemporary galleries and within contemporary discourse, which is very heartening. So I mean, I think that I couldn't tell if it was because I was just looking for it all of a sudden, or if it had been around for some time. But I do think that that's actually a newer development. And I'm thinking of like Lise Haller-Bagson's book Modernism, and the Artist Mother podcast is a wonderful resource as well, interviewing different artists and mothers. So there is also the Artist Parent Index that Sarah Irvin has curated too, is a great online resource. So there are a lot of wonderful resources, I think, to talk not about motherhood in terms of subject matter, but conceptually and how that's affecting artwork.
Absolutely. And Anna Dempsey, our colleague, said something really good. Women such as the Red Rose Girls make it because of networks and supportive partners, which is absolutely true. And this is why we wanted to do this and do it together. I feel that as women, we know that it is going to be harder for us to get what we want to get, or to achieve what we want to achieve, just historically. And yes, it is getting better. But I think there is a positive to that knowledge and that unfortunate fact. Because we know that it is going to be harder, we actually work 100% for it. So therefore, we actually get there. So it's, I know that I believe this is true for our academic institutions, our departments, all our colleagues are great, but again and again, women are the force that is behind the majority of the work. And nothing bad to say about the male colleagues, they're fantastic, but I just can't help but notice again and again that it is women that get a lot of that work done. And I think it is just because of that, because we know that if we don't go 200%, we won't achieve what we want to achieve. Therefore, we do.
And I was thinking about the Red Rose girls and how several of them were actually lesbians. You know, they were trying to carve out a place for themselves and not get married to a man. And so their living arrangements that they created and their ability to work was partially based on the fact that there were very few options available at the time for women who did not want to get married. You know, that was sort of the occupation. Yeah, Violet Oakley and Jessie Wilcox Smith. And the Women in Motion show actually really makes explicit in the wall labels the way sexuality and gender identity played a role in the decisions a lot of these artists made. So I really appreciated that.
Yeah, thank you all. And another thing that the wall labels, I think, bring to light too, are part of these networks are educational. And one of the things I wanted to mention is, you know, at least two of you are, you know, full-time professors. And I know, Clarity, you've taught classes, you've taught them for here with us on Zoom. But I wonder, you know, how is that now that you're on the other end of it, like talking about you as students creating this collective, and then now you're educating another, you know, generation of female and non-binary and artists, like, has that changed your relationship to this collective or to your making? I know that's a huge question, but I'm curious, you know, since you all spend so much of your time in the classroom now, what it's like.
It's a good question. I'm just thinking about it a little bit, but I think about PAFA all the time when I'm teaching, all the time. I think about my aha moments and like how I got there. And I think so much about, I've said this story many times about looking at Clarity's palette in painting class and just like coveting Clarity's palette, the way she's mixing flesh color, and also, you know, seeing Elena's work and just the incredible work ethic, you know, that Elena would bring to the class. And so I sometimes think about us as students, and I try to empathize with my students. I think that's like, I try to kind of remind myself of like where I was in that place. And I think that it's often, a lot of times I do think, well, what should I do differently? Because it wasn't perfect necessarily. And so really trying to make sure that I'm sensitive to different students' needs in 2021. It's incredibly, it feels actually very different than, you know, 2001. And it should be.
Yeah, I learned so much from my fellow students, and I do think about that when I'm teaching now, just that, like, you know, people may think the teacher is the most important person, but that's not true. It's actually the community in the classroom. And actually, you know, what I wanted to share this little anecdote, which was that when I started at PAFA, you know, it's a 4-year program and it's a very rigorous studio-based program. So every day, all day, you're going through classes where you're in the studio and you're painting and drawing and learning. And they separated it into tracks. So all day you're with your track, which is a smaller group. And I was in a certain track, and actually Elena and Susie were in a different track. And I looked over at their track and I said, that's the track I want to be in, because they had an energy about them. Like, that was where it was happening. And so I actually just probably came to Ann Stassen and said, can I switch my track? And I did. And then, yes, like I remember so much, just like, I want to stick with these people. You know, Elena would get a homework assignment and literally turn in a surrealist masterpiece. And I would be like, okay, the bar has been raised. This is it. Like, you know, I saw the big range of like seriousness among the students. And so yeah, that was a really good decision on my part to join the good track. Not that there was anything wrong with my track, but you know, it just didn't have the same dedication.
I think, Susie, you said something that I feel exactly the same way. The voices of our teachers stay with us, no matter how many years it's been. And it may be a little bit of Scott Noe, and a little bit of Bruce Samuelson and Sidney Goodman, and on and on and on. And they stay with us in our own studios, but they also stay with us when we learn how to be teachers ourselves. And this is a process that's a very long, ongoing process. All of us have been teaching for many years. I started in 2004, in first year of being a graduate student, and haven't stopped. So these voices become assimilated in our own way. Some of them may fall off or diminish, others may stay with us. You know, what we have taken away from our own teachers as artists and faculty. And then they become the building blocks of our voice, but in a hybrid way, they change and they become ours because we reconsider what they have taught us and what we think and what is most valuable out of all this exposure that we've had in undergraduate and graduate school and before. So when we work with our students, when I work with my students, I do think, like Susie said, what was I like as a student? Very much so. And how would I approach this if I were them? This is really essential. But at the same time, having the knowledge and the understanding that no one student is the same as another one. So they may be somebody completely different than me. And as artists and teachers, I very often think of us as cats. I do have a cat, so that's kind of a subjective preference for cats. I like dogs too, but we have to be incredibly flexible. Like a cat can be so flexible in what it can do and where it can shove itself or do with its spine. Incredibly flexible in relation to who our students are and how they learn and what we need to do in order to deliver what they need and engage them. But we also have to be incredibly flexible in my favorite thing to say to my students, I mean, many things, but one of them is that as faculty, we are like cats. If you drop us from the 10th floor of a building, we land on our feet because there's always, we have to be prepared for the unexpected. And no matter what happens, we have to land on our feet. Any situation in the classroom, any student, we just have to figure it out while we're coming down fast so that pulse it down, not up.
Thank you for that. That's a wonderful metaphor for teaching. I'm thinking as I'm teaching tomorrow, I'm like, I will visualize myself in my cat form. If it's all right for everyone, we just have one last question, if that's okay. No, we're reaching the end of our time, but Juno's been killing it in the chat, and I want to make sure that we recognize her question. And it's a great way to kind of end the program. Asking you maybe briefly if you could each share the most important thing you've learned about being in a collective for someone who's looking to start one herself.
I think it's important that it doesn't, that you don't have to subscribe to the same identity. Like your work doesn't need to look alike. Like you don't need any of those rules. You don't need any, I think it's your bond and, you know, some core values that you share that are really the key. And for that not to necessarily become like an aesthetic choice necessarily. That's just the first thing that pops in my head. But Clarity, you were going to say something.
I mean, it sort of maybe goes against a little bit what you said, but I feel like sometimes in terms of the content of the work itself, I think that it gets nurtured to have a space that's not an institution, but that's like self-created with us. I think I knew that I kind of needed a home for my work to develop in a free way where it would be understood. And so I feel like that's one of the benefits for me of one of the most important benefits of a collective is that it can be really nurturing to the work and let it be what it needs to be without a sense of like having to explain it too much or maybe some sense of misunderstanding that might happen in the larger world.
Absolutely. And I think being in a collective allows for that essential dialogue that we all need as artists. And it allows for the safe space for this to happen, but also the supportive space for this to happen so that we can help each other and we can talk and we can exhibit together. So it creates a structure for us to be able to do this.
Wonderful answers. Thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts and your insights. And it's just been a pleasure working with all of you and getting to spend the evening with you. So I'll let you all say the last word, but thank you to our audience for being here with us too.
Thank you. That was really fun. It was great to see everybody.
Thank you. Truly wonderful to have all of you. Thank you for this. And so good to be together again, even over Zoom.
And thank you to Abby and Anna Marley too for curating that amazing show and providing a kind of forum for us to be seen and heard. It means a lot.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Pleasure. All right, everyone have a good night. We hope to see you again soon. Stay safe.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.